a millionaire socialite, was walking with her twin sons toward the exclusive section of the restaurant, a place reserved for the most important people. But before she went up, she saw a single father with his daughter in the main dining area, sharing a simple plate and smiling as if it were a grand celebration. The sight stopped her in her tracks, and what she did next, no one in that place was prepared to see. Support the channel by hitting that like button and leaving a comment, and let's get to our story. Eleanor Vance rarely had time for dinners out. Her routine was calculated down to the minute. Strategic meetings in the morning, visits to the factories of the cosmetics company she inherited from her husband in the afternoon, and at night the little time she had left was dedicated to her twin sons Leo and Raphael. But that Friday, after 3 consecutive weeks of canceling promises, she finally gave in to the boys' insistent pleas. "Mom, you promised. You promised you'd have dinner out with us," Raphael had said with that look she couldn't ignore. Leo, always quieter, just held her hand and whispered, "We just want to be with you, Mom." And there she was, walking into Bella Vita Trattoria, one of New York City's most elegant restaurants, with her 2 7-year-old boys walking beside her. Eleanor wore a discreet but impeccably tailored white dress that drew attention with its effortless elegance. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and even without trying, she carried the air of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and closing million-dollar deals. People turned to look not just for her beauty, but for her presence. Eleanor Vance commanded respect without saying a word. Leo and Raphael, dressed in white button-down shirts and dark trousers, looked like miniature executives next to their mother, but beneath the flawless clothes they were just 2 7-year-old boys, full of energy, curiosity, and an insatiable hunger for maternal attention they rarely got to fully satisfy. The maitre d' approached with a professional smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Vance. Your table is ready in the VIP section as always." Eleanor nodded, but before she could proceed, Raphael pulled her hand hard. Mom, look." She followed her son's gaze and saw where he was pointing. In the main dining room, far from the private reserved tables where the elite usually dined, there was a simple table near the window. Sitting there were a man and a little girl. The man looked to be in his early 30s, slightly messy brown hair, a dress shirt that was a bit wrinkled as if he'd been working all day. He was smiling at the girl in front of him, a little girl of about 6 with brown curls and a simple polka dot dress. The scene was ordinary, nothing special, but Raphael's eyes were shining as if he'd seen something extraordinary. "What is it, Raphael?" Eleanor asked, trying to maintain her patience. "That man looks like Dad," Leo said softly, and Eleanor felt her chest tighten. She looked again. No, the man didn't look like Richard, her late husband, but there was something in the way he looked at his daughter, in the way he held the menu and pointed to the options, while the girl laughed that perhaps reminded the boys of something they no longer had. Richard had died 2 years ago in a helicopter crash. The twins were only 5 at the time. The pain was still there, it always would be, but Eleanor had learned to channel it into fuel, to work harder to build an empire that would secure her son's future. But in the process, she knew she had become colder, more distant, more like a ruthless executive than the warm mother she used to be. "Can we sit with them?" Raphael asked, his eyes pleading. Eleanor blinked, confused. "What, Raphael? We have a private table. We can't just—" "Please, Mom," Leo joined his brother. "Just this once. We promise we'll eat all our food." The maitre d' cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Vance, I can escort you to the VIP section. It will be more appropriate." Appropriate. That word summed up Eleanor's life for the past 2 years. Everything had to be appropriate, controlled within expectations. But when she looked at her sons, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, genuine excitement. And before she could fully process what she was doing, she heard her own voice say, "All right, let's go to that table." The maitre d' almost dropped his reservation book. "Ma'am, I really think, thank you, but that won't be necessary." Eleanor cut him off, polite but firm. Then she took her boy's hands and walked toward the main dining room, feeling every eye in the restaurant on her. Jack Sullivan was having one of the best days he'd had in months, not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because finally, after 3 weeks of double shifts at the auto shop, he managed to leave on time and keep the promise he made to Camila. Taking her out to dinner was nothing fancy, not the kind of place that served lobster or expensive wines, but it was what he could afford. And by the way, his daughter's eyes lit up as she looked at the menu, as if it were a treasure map. Jack knew it had been worth every saved penny. "Daddy, can I get the spaghetti and meatballs?" Camila asked, her voice full of hope. Jack smiled, stroking her hair affectionately. "You can have whatever you want, princess. Tonight is your night." Camila was everything to him. After her mother left them 4 years ago, when the girl was only 2, Jack found himself alone, scared, not knowing how he would raise a child by himself. But he fought. He woke up at 5 a.m., dropped Camila off at a neighbor's house, went to work at the shop, rushed back to pick her up, made dinner, gave her a bath, and told her stories before bed. And on weekends, when he wasn't picking up extra jobs, he dedicated every second to her. It wasn't an easy life, far from it, but it was theirs. And Jack wouldn't trade it for anything. "Daddy, what are you getting?" Camila asked, tilting her head. "I'm getting the same thing as you," Jack replied with a wink. "That way we can share and try a bit of everything." Camila giggled. That crystal-clear laugh, which was the most beautiful thing Jack had ever heard. And then something happened. 2 boys appeared beside their table. They were identical twins, impeccably dressed, and they were looking at Jack and Camila with intense curiosity. Jack blinked in surprise. "Hi," one of the boys said, smiling. "Can I sit here?" Jack looked around, confused. Are you lost? Where are your parents?" "I'm right here," a female voice said. And Jack looked up. The woman standing beside the table was striking, not just beautiful, but there was something in her posture, in the way she held her expensive handbag, in the way the white dress fell perfectly on her slender frame, that screamed wealth and power. She had a neutral, almost cold expression, but her dark brown eyes held something Jack couldn't decipher. Tiredness, perhaps, or sadness hidden behind a mask of control. Jack stood up quickly, nearly knocking over his water glass. "Good evening. I'm sorry the boys—" "I know," Eleanor said, and her voice was soft, but there was a formality to it. "My sons insisted on sitting here. I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll go to our reserved table." "No, Mom," Raphael protested. "You promised." Leo tugged at his mother's hand, his eyes pleading. "Please." Eleanor closed her eyes for a second, as if gathering her patience. Jack saw her internal conflict, and something inside him sympathized. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who was trying to do their best, but was exhausted. "Look," Jack said, his voice gentle. "You don't have to worry. They're just kids. If they want to sit here, they're more than welcome. The table is big enough." Eleanor stared at him, and for a moment Jack saw surprise in her eyes, as if she wasn't used to people being kind without wanting something in return. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but the boys were already pulling up chairs and sitting next to Camila, who was looking at them with a mix of surprise and shyness. "Hi, I'm Raphael," he said to Camila with a grin. And this is Leo. We're twins. How old are you?" Camilla looked at her father as if asking for permission to answer. Jack nodded with a smile, and she turned her attention back to the boys. "I'm 6. And you?" "7, Leo replied. "Is he your dad?" He pointed to Jack. "He is," Camilla said proudly. "That's my dad. He's the best dad in the world." Jack felt his chest swell with warmth. Eleanor, still standing, looked at him with an expression he couldn't interpret. Then slowly she pulled out a chair and sat down, placing her handbag in her lap. "I'm sorry for the intrusion," she said, her voice still formal. "My sons, they don't usually do this." "No need to apologize," Jack replied, sitting back down. "Kids have that spontaneity, don't they? It's a beautiful thing to see." Eleanor didn't answer right away. She just watched her sons, who were already chattering excitedly with Camilla about cartoons and games. And then, for the first time since she arrived, Jack saw what looked like a crack in her mask. A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips, so fleeting it was almost imperceptible. The waiter approached, clearly confused by the unusual situation. "Good evening, may I take your orders?" Jack picked up the menu again, but before he could speak, Raphael turned to him. "Mister, what are you getting?" "Mister," Jack repeated in surprise, but he smiled. "I'm getting the spaghetti and meatballs. What about you?" "Me too," Raphael said excitedly. "I'll have the same as him." Eleanor opened her mouth to correct her son to order something more sophisticated, but she stopped. There was something in the way Raphael looked at Jack as if he were seeing someone he admired that made her hesitate. Leo also ordered the same, and Camilla, excited to have company, changed her order to include a dessert the boys suggested. Jack looked at Eleanor. "And for you, ma'am?" "Eleanor," she corrected him softly. "You can call me Eleanor." "Eleanor," Jack repeated, and the name sounded different on his lips, warmer. "I'm Jack. It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine," Eleanor replied, and for the first time her voice didn't sound so cold. She ordered something simple, much simpler than she normally would, and when the waiter walked away, a strange silence fell over the table. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with something. Two people from completely different worlds sitting at the same table because their children had decided that's what they wanted. "Your daughter is very well behaved," Eleanor said, finally looking at Camilla, who was laughing at something Raphael had said. "Thank you," Jack replied, pride evident in his voice. "I try to do the best I can. It's not easy raising a child alone, but she's worth every bit of effort." Eleanor looked at him, and Jack saw something shift in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "You're a widower." "No," Jack answered without bitterness. "Her mother left us when Camilla was 2, just walked out and never came back." Eleanor was silent for a moment. Then quietly, almost as if confessing something she rarely shared, she said, "I'm a widow. My husband died 2 years ago." Jack felt a pang in his chest. "I'm so sorry." "Thank you," Eleanor said, and there was a sincerity in that thanks that surprised even herself. They fell silent again, but this time it was different. It was the silence of two people who recognized a similar battle in each other. Jack looked at Eleanor, really looked, and saw beyond the expensive dress and flawless posture. He saw a tired woman trying to balance the entire world on her shoulders, trying to be strong for her children while carrying her own pain. And Eleanor, looking at Jack, saw a man who clearly didn't have money, but had something she had lost along the way. Lightness. He smiled easily, touched his daughter with natural affection, and there was a genuine happiness in his eyes that she hadn't seen in herself for a very long time. "Mom," Leo called, pulling Eleanor from her thoughts. "Can I have orange juice?" "You may," Eleanor replied, and her voice was softer now. Dad, can I have one too? Camilla asked. Of course, Princess, Jack answered with a smile. And so, as the children chattered excitedly, and the adults exchanged occasional glances, something began to form at that table. Something small, fragile, but real. An unexpected connection between two people who had nothing in common except the love for their children and the courage to keep going even when life had been cruel. Jack didn't know it, but that dinner would change everything. And Eleanor, for all her logic and control, couldn't ignore the fact that for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel completely alone. The food arrived faster than Eleanor expected. The waiter distributed the plates with professional efficiency, but she noticed his surprised glance at the unusual setup. A woman clearly from high society dining with a man in a wrinkled dress shirt and worn-out sneakers surrounded by 3 children laughing as if they were old friends. Eleanor could almost hear the waiter's thoughts, could almost feel the curious stares from other tables, but when she looked at her sons, she saw something that made her forget completely about what others thought. Leo and Raphael were happy, truly happy. It had been so long since she'd seen that sparkle in their eyes that she decided right then and there it didn't matter how strange or inappropriate this was in society's eyes. "Look, Daddy," Camilla exclaimed, pointing to the giant plate of pasta in front of her. "It's so much," Jack laughed, picking up his fork and starting to twirl the spaghetti. "That's why we share. Remember, that way nothing goes to waste." Raphael watched intently as Jack twirled the pasta, his tongue sticking out in concentration. "Mr. Jack, can you teach me how to do that? I always drop it." Eleanor felt a strange pang in her chest, hearing her son call this man Mr. with such naturalness. Raphael had never done that with any of the executives she knew, none of Richard's friends, who still tried to keep in touch, but here with a complete stranger, he was completely at ease. "Sure," Jack replied with a smile. "Here, let me show you. The trick is not to grab too much at once, just a little bit, and spin it slowly." He demonstrated patiently, and Raphael tried to imitate him, tongue still out in absolute concentration. When he finally managed to get the fork to his mouth without spilling, he beamed so widely that Eleanor felt her eyes sting. "I did it!" Raphael exclaimed, and Leo clapped proud of his brother. "Well done," Jack said, raising his hand for a high five that Raphael returned with enthusiasm. Eleanor watched the scene, and something inside her began to break, not painfully, but as if a wall she had carefully built around her heart was starting to crack. She had convinced herself she was doing everything right, that working non-stop to secure her children's future was what a good mother did. But looking at them now, seeing how they interacted with Jack and Camilla, she realized she might be getting something fundamental wrong. Maybe they didn't need more money or more security. Maybe they just needed her. Present. Truly present. "Eleanor." Jack's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He was looking at her with a gentle, almost concerned expression. "Are you okay? You haven't touched your food." Eleanor blinked, realizing she'd been staring at her plate for too long. "I'm just thinking." "Is something making you sad?" Camilla asked with the brutal honesty only children possess. "You look sad." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. This little girl who barely knew her had seen through the mask she wore every day. "I'm not sad," she replied softly, surprising herself with a real smile. "Just tired. But I'm happy to be here with my sons, and to have met you." Camilla smiled back, satisfied with the answer, and returned to her food. Jack, however, kept looking at Eleanor for another moment, as if trying to understand something. Then he picked up his own fork and started eating. Eleanor noticed he divided every generous portion between himself and Camilla, making sure his daughter ate more than he did. Jack, Eleanor said before she could think better of it. You don't have to do that. He looked up confused. Do what? Share like that. You can order more food. I can pay. The silence that followed was heavy. Jack slowly put his fork down, and for the first time since they sat down, Eleanor saw something different on his face. It wasn't anger, but there was a boundary there, a line she had just crossed without realizing. I appreciate the offer, Jack said, his voice calm but firm. But I can take care of my daughter. I don't need charity. Eleanor felt her face flush. That's not what I meant. I know, Jack interrupted, but not rudely. And I understand you're trying to be kind. But I'm proud of what I do, of what I'm able to give my daughter. It might not be much compared to what you can offer your sons, but it's honest. It's mine. Eleanor fell silent, feeling a shame she hadn't felt in years. She had offended this man, even unintentionally. She had reduced him to someone who needed help, when he was clearly someone fighting with his own strength to give his daughter the best. I'm sorry, she said, and there was real sincerity in her voice. You're right. That was insensitive of me. Jack looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. It's okay. I know you didn't mean any harm. The tense moment passed, but it left something in the air, an understanding that they came from very different worlds, with values and perspectives that didn't easily align. But at the same time, a mutual respect was beginning to form. Eleanor respected Jack's dignity, and he respected the vulnerability she rarely showed. Mom, Leo called, oblivious to the tension. Jack said he fixes cars. Do you think he can fix your car, that weird noise you said you were hearing? Eleanor blinked in surprise. She had mentioned that to her assistant last week, but didn't know Leo had overheard. I already have a mechanic, Leo. But Jack is good, Raphael insisted. He said he's been fixing cars for years. Jack chuckled, a little embarrassed. I work at a shop in Queens. It's nothing too fancy, but we get the job done. Queens, Eleanor repeated, and for the first time she noticed the details she had ignored before. Jack's hands calloused and stained with grease that didn't fully wash off. The dress shirt, likely his best piece of clothing, was frayed at the cuffs. The slight stoop of his shoulders from someone who spent all day hunched over engines. He worked hard, very hard, and yet here he was, smiling, playing with her sons, beaming, just to be able to provide this simple moment for Camila. It must be difficult work, Eleanor said, and there was no condescension in her voice, only genuine curiosity. Jack shrugged. It is, but I like it. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again, and it gives me flexible hours so I can pick Camila up from school to be there when she needs me. Daddy always picks me up, Camila said proudly, wiping tomato sauce from her face. And he makes the best spaghetti at home, but today he brought me here because it's special. Why is it special? Leo asked, tilting his head. Camila beamed, and there was a happiness so pure in that smile that even Eleanor felt her heart warm. Because I got an A on my math test, and Daddy said that when I work hard we celebrate. Wow, Raphael exclaimed. I hate math. You're so smart. Can you teach me? Leo asked shyly. I'm not very good either. Camila looked to her father as if for permission, and Jack nodded with a smile. Of course, I'll teach you. Math is easy once you know the trick. And so, as the children started talking about school and subjects, Eleanor watched Jack. He didn't have money, expensive clothes, or an imported car, but he had something she didn't. He was present, truly present. He knew his daughter knew what she was studying, celebrated her victories, taught by example, and did it all without complaining, without feeling sorry for himself, without playing the victim for the hand life had dealt him. You're a good father, Eleanor said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could filter them. Jack looked up, surprised. Thanks, I try. No, Eleanor insisted, a new intensity in her voice. "You're not just trying. You're succeeding. Your daughter loves you, she admires you, and she's happy. That's rare." Jack studied her face, and Eleanor saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. "Your sons love you too," he said gently. "You're doing the best you can." "Am I?" Eleanor asked, and there was a raw vulnerability in that question. "Sometimes I'm not so sure. Sometimes I think I'm failing them." "You're here, aren't you?" Jack pointed out. "You could have said no when they asked to sit here. You could have taken them to the private table and ignored us, but you didn't. You listened to your sons. That's more than a lot of parents do." Eleanor felt her eyes sting again, but blinked rapidly. She didn't cry, not in front of strangers. But Jack's words touched something deep inside her, something she didn't know she needed to hear. The dinner continued, and the conversation flowed more easily. The kids were now the center of attention, laughing, telling stories, making impossible plans to meet again. And Eleanor and Jack slowly began to open up, too. She told him about the company she inherited, about trying to honor her husband's legacy while raising her sons alone. He told her about the shop, about his loyal customers, about his dream of one day owning his own business. "You'll do it," Eleanor said with conviction. "You have the determination." "Thanks," Jack replied, gratitude in his voice. "But honestly, my biggest dream isn't to have a big shop or make a lot of money. It's just to make sure Camila has a better life than I did, that she has opportunities, that she can get an education, that she never has to go without." Eleanor looked at him, and something solidified within her at that moment. Jack wasn't like the men she knew. He wasn't interested in impressing her, in showing off success or conquering anything. He just wanted to be a good father. And in that, Eleanor realized he was far better than she had been for the past 2 years. When dessert arrived, a brownie with ice cream that the 3 children eagerly shared, Eleanor felt something strange. She didn't want this dinner to end. She didn't want to go back to her empty house, to her calculated routine, to the walls she had built around herself. She wanted to stay there at that simple table, listening to her sons laugh, watching the way Jack smiled at Camila, feeling that human warmth she had forgotten existed. But all good things come to an end. When they finished eating, Jack looked at his watch and sighed. "Camila, princess, it's getting late. We need to go home." "But I was having so much fun," Camila pouted. "Me too," Leo admitted. "Do you live far?" "In Queens," Jack replied. "And you?" "The Upper East Side," Raphael said, and Eleanor saw the understanding in Jack's eyes. One of the most expensive neighborhoods in the city. Completely different worlds. Jack asked for the check, and when the waiter brought it, Eleanor watched how he carefully reviewed the total before taking out his wallet. She wanted to offer to pay again, but she had learned her lesson. So she stayed silent, just watching as he paid with counted bills, leaving a modest but respectful tip. They stood up together, and the children said goodbye with tight hugs, as if they were old friends parting ways. Eleanor watched her heart aching. "This was unexpected," Jack said, extending his hand to Eleanor. "But it was good to meet you." Eleanor looked at his hand, calloused and honest, and then shook it. "It was good to meet you too, Jack, really." He smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Eleanor feel that maybe, just maybe, this meeting wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something neither of them expected, but that both desperately needed. As the 2 families left the restaurant in opposite directions, Eleanor found herself looking back, watching Jack hold Camila's hand as they walked toward the bus stop. And for the first time in 2 years, she wondered if there was more to life than just surviving. Maybe there was room for living too. Eleanor couldn't sleep that night. She lay in the king-sized bed of her designer-decorated bedroom, staring at the ceiling as the silent house around her seemed to amplify every thought in her head. The twins had fallen asleep quickly exhausted, but happy, murmuring about dinner as she tucked them in. "Mom, can we see Jack and Camila again?" Raphael had asked, his eyes already closing. Eleanor hadn't known what to say, so she just kissed his forehead and said, "We'll see, my love." But now, alone in the dark, she couldn't stop thinking about that table, about that man with the wrinkled shirt and easy smile, about that little girl who radiated happiness despite having so little. Eleanor got up, put on her silk robe, and walked to her home office on the second floor of the mansion. The walls were covered with degrees, business awards, photos of Richard at corporate events, all very beautiful, very impressive, and completely devoid of real meaning. She sat in the leather chair, turned on her computer, and before she could think better of it, typed into Google, "Auto Mechanic Shops, Queens, NYC." Dozens of results appeared. Which one was his? Why was she even looking? What exactly did she hope to find? Eleanor closed the laptop with a frustrated sigh. She was being ridiculous. She had met this man by chance, shared an impromptu dinner, and now she was acting like what? She didn't even know. It wasn't romantic interest, she convinced herself. It was just curiosity, admiration, perhaps, for the way he raised his daughter, for the dignity he maintained despite his difficulties. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was the way he had looked at her when she admitted she felt like a failing mother. It was the kindness in his eyes when he said she was doing the best she could. It was the fact that for the first time since Richard died, she had felt seen not as the businesswoman Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Cosmetics, but as Eleanor, just Eleanor, a tired woman struggling to do everything right and failing most of the time. On the other side of the city, in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, Jack was also awake. Camila was asleep in the next room, hugging a worn teddy bear that had been her companion since she was a baby. He was sitting on the small living room sofa, a half-finished beer on the coffee table, staring at his phone as if expecting something to happen. A text, maybe a contact, anything to prove that dinner hadn't just been an isolated, strange moment in his life. But the phone remained silent. Of course it did. He hadn't given Eleanor his number, and she hadn't offered hers. Why would she? They were from different worlds. She probably dined at places like that every week, met new people constantly. To her, it had been nothing more than an inconvenience her sons had forced her to endure. But Jack couldn't quite convince himself of that because there was something in the way Eleanor had looked at him when he talked about his daughter. There was vulnerability there, a crack in the icy armor she wore. And when she admitted she felt like a failing mother, Jack saw something in her he recognized immediately. Loneliness. The same loneliness he carried every day. That feeling of fighting against the world all by yourself. He took another sip of beer and stood up, walking to the small window that overlooked the busy street. Cars passed by even at this hour. Occasional horns broke the silence, and the city remained alive and indifferent to the worries of a lonely mechanic. Jack thought of Camila, of the smile on her face throughout dinner. She had loved the twins, loved talking to other kids besides her classmates. And if Jack was honest with himself, he had enjoyed it too. He enjoyed talking to Eleanor, seeing beyond the cold mask, discovering that beneath all that wealth and power was a real person with real fears and insecurities. But that didn't change anything. They had met, shared a meal, and now they would go back to their completely different lives. That's how the world worked. Or at least, that's what Jack thought. On Monday morning, Eleanor was in a tense meeting with her company's board of directors. The numbers for the last quarter weren't bad, but they weren't exceptional either, and she felt the pressure of every gaze in the room. Richard had built this company from scratch, turning it into one of the leading cosmetics brands in the country. And now it was up to her to maintain that legacy, to expand, to innovate. There was no room for weakness, no room for error. "We need to reformulate the launch campaign for the new moisturizer," the marketing director was saying. "The focus groups indicated that the current message isn't resonating with the target audience. It's too technical, not emotional enough." Eleanor listened, took notes, asked the right questions, but part of her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the sons she had left with the nanny again that morning. She was thinking about how Leo had asked if she would pick them up from school, and how she had to say no that she had meetings all day. She was thinking about Jack, who rearranged his entire workday to be able to pick up Camila. Every day. "Eleanor," the CFO's voice brought her back. "Do you agree with the proposal?" Eleanor blinked, realizing she had missed the last few minutes of the conversation. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Glances were exchanged around the table. Eleanor Vance never lost focus, never asked for repeats. She was always 2 steps ahead of everyone. But today, she was distant. "I was suggesting we invest in partnerships with smaller, more authentic influencers instead of celebrities," the director repeated. "Create a more real narrative, more connected to ordinary women." Ordinary women. The phrase echoed in Eleanor's mind. She wasn't an ordinary woman. She never had been. Born with a silver spoon, educated at the best schools, married to a successful entrepreneur. But the other night, sitting at that table with Jack and Camila, she had felt exactly that ordinary. And it had been liberating. "Yes," Eleanor said finally. "Do it. Authenticity. That's what we need." The meeting continued, but Eleanor was barely paying attention. When it finally ended, she went back to her office and closed the door, leaning her back against the expensive wood. She was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. She was tired of pretending she was fine, of pretending she had everything under control, of pretending she didn't feel like she was drowning every day. She picked up her phone and, without much thought, called her assistant. "Cancel my afternoon meetings." "But Mrs. Vance, you have the presentation for the investors at 3. "Cancel it," Eleanor repeated more firmly. "Reschedule for tomorrow. I need to leave early today." There was a surprised silence on the other end of the line. "Of course, ma'am. I'll take care of it." Eleanor hung up and stood still for a moment, processing what she had just done. She never canceled meetings, never put anything before work. But today, she was going to pick up her sons from school, take them for ice cream, ask about their day. She was going to be present, just like Jack was present for Camila. She grabbed her bag and walked out of her office, ignoring the surprised looks from her employees in the elevator. As she descended the 15 floors to the parking garage, Eleanor wondered what exactly she was doing. Was she changing? Was she letting a casual dinner with a stranger affect important professional decisions? It was crazy. It was irresponsible. But for the first time in 2 years, she didn't care. Meanwhile, Jack was under a car at the shop, changing the oil and checking the brakes. His hands were covered in grease, his body ached from the physical labor, but he worked with practiced efficiency. His boss, Joe, a man in his 60s with a prominent belly and a heart of gold, appeared beside the car. "Jack, when you're done there, a customer is asking for you specifically," he said. "Said they were recommended." "Who is it?" Jack asked, still focused on the brakes. "A woman. Said her car is making a weird noise." Jack nodded, finished the job, and wiped his hands on a rag that was already black with grease. He slid out from under the car, straightened his blue uniform shirt, and walked to the front desk. And then he froze. Eleanor Vance was standing there in the middle of the small, modest garage, looking completely out of place in her elegant business suit and high heels. She was clutching her handbag with both hands, and there was an almost nervous energy in her posture. When she saw Jack, she tried to smile, but it was a shy, uncertain smile. "Hi," she said simply. Jack stood there for a moment, trying to process what he was seeing. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" She looked around, clearly uncomfortable. "My car is making a strange noise. Leo mentioned you were a mechanic, and I thought, maybe you could take a look." Jack stared at her, trying to understand. She had come all the way to Queens, sought out his shop for a noise in her car. A woman like her likely had a luxury dealership on speed dial. She didn't need to come to a modest shop in an outer borough, unless it wasn't really about the car. "Of course," Jack said finally, trying to keep his voice professional. "Where is the car?" Eleanor pointed to the street where a black Mercedes was parked. Of course it was a Mercedes. Jack almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. He who mostly worked on old Beetles and clunkers with blown engines was about to look at a Mercedes. They walked to the car together, and Jack noticed how Eleanor avoided stepping in the oil puddles on the shop floor, how she held her expensive bag away from any dirty surfaces. She was completely out of her element, and yet she had come. "Start the engine," Jack requested, and Eleanor complied. He stood silently listening to the engine hum. There was indeed a faint noise, likely the alternator belt needing an adjustment. Nothing serious, nothing urgent. Something that could wait for months without any issue, he thought. "It's the alternator belt," Jack said, turning off the engine. "It needs an adjustment, but it's nothing major. I can do it now. It'll take about 20 minutes. "Okay," Eleanor replied, and then she just stood there, as if she didn't know what to do next. Jack looked at her, and finally asked what was burning in his mind. "Why did you really come here, Eleanor?" She opened her mouth, closed it, and then let out a frustrated sigh. "I don't know. I couldn't stop thinking about that dinner, about my sons, about how happy they were, about you and Camila, and I realized I wanted to see you again." Jack's heart leapt, but he tried to keep his expression neutral. "Why? Because you made me feel something I haven't felt in a very long time," Eleanor admitted, and there was a raw vulnerability in her confession. "You made me feel that maybe I'm not failing as much as I thought. And I wanted to thank you for that." Jack was silent for a long moment. Then, without much thought, he smiled. "Want to grab a coffee while I fix the car? There's a diner on the corner. Nothing fancy, but the coffee's good." Eleanor looked at him, and slowly, a genuine smile spread across her face. "I'd love that." And as they walked side by side down the street in Queens, a millionaire executive and a mechanic, both completely out of their elements, both risking something they didn't fully understand, something began to blossom. Something small, fragile, but real. Something neither of them expected, but that both desperately needed the hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't so alone after all. The corner diner was the exact opposite of everything Eleanor was used to. The tables were old formica, the chairs mismatched, and the concrete floor was worn with time. But the smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee was welcoming. And when Eleanor sat in one of the plastic chairs, she realized she didn't mind the simplicity. In fact, there was something liberating about being there with no one recognizing her without having to maintain her flawless C-suite posture. Jack ordered 2 coffees and 2 chicken pot pies, ignoring Eleanor's polite protest that she didn't need to eat. "You have to try it," he said with a smile. "Maria makes the best pies in Queens. It's practically a requirement." When the food arrived, Eleanor took a cautious bite of the pie and couldn't hide her surprise. It was genuinely delicious, flaky on the outside, savory and juicy on the inside, seasoned to perfection. "Wow," she said, and Jack laughed at the genuine look of surprise on her face. "I told you," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "Not everything good is expensive." Eleanor nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "I think I forgot that. I've forgotten a lot of things, actually." Jack watched her for a moment. She was different here, more relaxed than at the restaurant. The suit was still impeccable, her hair still perfectly styled, but the tension in her shoulders seemed to have eased. "What did you forget?" he asked gently. Eleanor sighed, putting the pie down. "I forgot how to live, I think. After Richard died, I threw myself into work. I thought if I kept the company growing, if I made sure my sons had everything they needed financially, I'd be fulfilling my role. But in the process, I forgot to be present. I forgot to just be a mom." "You're being too hard on yourself," Jack said, his voice genuinely kind. "You're doing the best you can in an impossible situation. Raising kids alone isn't easy no matter how much money you have." "But you do it," Eleanor pointed out. "You work all day, earn a fraction of what I do, and yet you're more present for Camilla than I am for my sons." Jack shook his head. "It's not a competition, Eleanor, and you're only seeing a snapshot of my life. You don't see the nights when Camilla cries because she wants things I can't give her. You don't see her asking why we don't have a big house like her friends, or why we can't go on vacation. I fail every day too." Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time saw beyond the facade of the perfect father she had built in her mind. Jack was human too. He struggled, he felt inadequate at times, and somehow that made him even more admirable because he kept trying, kept showing up, kept loving his daughter with everything he had. "How do you deal with it?" Eleanor asked. "With the guilt of not being able to give them everything?" Jack was silent for a moment, turning the coffee cup in his hands. "I remind myself that love can't be bought, that being present is worth more than any expensive toy or designer outfit. And when the guilt gets too strong, I look at Camilla and I see that she's happy. She laughs, she hugs me, she knows she's loved. And that tells me I'm getting the things that really matter, right?" Eleanor felt her eyes sting. "Are my sons happy?" The question was so vulnerable, so raw, that Jack felt his chest ache. He reached across the table, hesitated for a second, and then lightly touched her hand. "They adore you. Anyone can see that. But they miss you, Eleanor. They want more of you, not your money, not the things you can buy. Just you." Eleanor turned her hand, lacing her fingers with his, and stared at his calloused hands that told stories of hard work and sacrifice. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper. "Scared that if I stop working so hard, the company will fall apart. Scared that if I don't keep everything under control, I'll lose what Richard built. And if I lose that, I lose the last connection I have to him." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "Richard is gone, Eleanor. I know it hurts to accept that, but you're still here. Your sons are still here. And they need you alive, present, not a version of you who's stuck in the past." The tears finally fell silent and unavoidable. Eleanor didn't try to hide them, didn't try to wipe them away. She just let them run, releasing something that had been trapped inside her for 2 years. And Jack just sat there, holding her hand, saying nothing. Just being present. After a few minutes, Eleanor wiped her tears with a napkin and let out a humorless laugh. "I'm sorry. I don't usually do this." "Do what cry be human." Jack smiled gently. "You should do it more often. It's good for you." Eleanor smiled back, a genuine smile this time. "Thank you, Jack, for listening, for not judging me." "Anytime," he said simply. They sat in silence for a moment, the diner's ambient noise creating a bubble of privacy around them. Then Eleanor asked, "The boys asked about you and Camilla. They want to see you again." Jack's heart sped up. "Really?" "Yes, and I would like that too. If you want to, of course. I don't want to force anything. I don't want you to feel—" "I want to." Jack interrupted perhaps a little too quickly. "I mean, Camilla would love that too. She hasn't stopped talking about the boys." Eleanor smiled, a visible relief on her face. "How about Saturday? We could take the kids to the park. Something simple, casual." "Saturday is perfect," Jack replied, then hesitated. "Eleanor, I need you to know I don't have any ulterior motives here. I'm not trying to, I don't know, take advantage of your situation or your money. I know," Eleanor interrupted him softly. "If I thought that I wouldn't be here. You're one of the few people I've met in recent years who doesn't want anything from me except for me to be human. And that's more valuable than you can imagine." Jack nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. They finished their coffee talking about lighter things, the kids' antics, funny stories from work, small joys of daily life. And when they finally returned to the shop where the Mercedes was waiting, there was an ease between them that hadn't been there before. Jack fixed the car quickly, and when it came time to pay, Eleanor tried to give him double the amount. He firmly refused, accepting only the fair price for the service. "I'm not taking charity, Eleanor. We talked about this." "It's not charity," she protested. "It's valuing good work." "Then pay the fair price," Jack replied. But he was smiling. "And invite me for another coffee sometime." Eleanor smiled back. "All right, fair price it is. And you have a standing invitation." Before getting into her car, Eleanor hesitated. "Jack, thank you. For today. For everything." "Always," he replied, and there was a silent promise in that one word. Eleanor drove back to the Upper East Side with a heart lighter than it had been in months. When she got home, the twins ran to hug her, surprised and happy that she was home early. "Mom, you came to get us from school today," Raphael exclaimed. "I did," Eleanor said, kneeling to their level. "And you know what? We're going to do this more often. In fact, we're going to do a lot of things together. Starting this Saturday, we're going to the park, and you'll never guess who's coming with us." "Who?" Leo asked, his eyes shining with curiosity. "Jack and Camilla," Eleanor replied, and saw the explosion of joy on her sons' faces. "Really?" they shouted in unison, jumping with excitement. "Really?" Eleanor confirmed, realizing she was smiling truly, smiling in a way she hadn't in a very long time. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Eleanor sat on the living room sofa with a glass of wine and thought about the turn her life had taken in just a few days. She had met a man under completely improbable circumstances, a man who on paper had nothing in common with her, but who understood her struggles in a way no one else did. Instead of running from this strange, unexpected connection, she was choosing to explore it. It was scary. It was reckless. It was completely out of her comfort zone. But for the first time since Richard died, Eleanor felt alive. Across the city, Jack was lying on his sofa, with Camilla asleep in her room, and the apartment silent around him. He thought about Eleanor, about the way she held his hand in the diner, the vulnerability she showed. He thought about the coming Saturday, about the possibility of seeing those energetic twins again, of spending more time with this woman who intrigued and attracted him in equal measure. Jack was no fool. He knew their worlds didn't fit together easily. He knew there would be huge obstacles if this were to become anything more than an unlikely friendship. But he also knew he couldn't just ignore what he was feeling. The connection, the chemistry, the mutual recognition of two souls fighting similar battles in very different trenches. He picked up his phone and after a moment's hesitation typed a message. "Thanks for today. It was special." Eleanor's reply came almost immediately. "For me too. See you Saturday." Jack smiled, put his phone down, and closed his eyes. See you Saturday. 3 days felt like an eternity, but he would wait. Because something told him that this, whatever was beginning to blossom between him and Eleanor, was worth waiting for. And as the city slept outside, two people on opposite sides of New York drifted off with smiles on their faces, dreaming of possibilities neither had thought possible just a week before. Saturday dawned with a clear blue sky, the kind New York City offers when it decides to grant a reprieve from the hustle and haze. Eleanor woke up earlier than usual, a strange flutter in her chest. It wasn't the anxiety that preceded important meetings or investor presentations. This was different, lighter, almost like excitement. She found herself choosing her outfit with more care than was necessary for a simple trip to the park. Nothing too formal, she decided. Light-colored jeans, a simple white blouse, and sneakers. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Without the impeccable suits and high heels, she looked younger, more approachable, more like the Eleanor who existed before Richard died. "Mom, is it time yet?" Raphael appeared at her bedroom door, already dressed, his hair styled with a gel he had insisted on using. Leo was right behind him, equally neat, both of them beaming with excitement. Eleanor smiled, her heart warming. "Easy, you two. We still have half an hour. Let's have breakfast first." During breakfast, the twins couldn't stop talking about what they were going to do at the park, what they would show Camilla, whether Jack would play soccer with them. Eleanor just listened, smiling, realizing it had been a long time since she'd seen her sons so animated. And it was all because of a chance encounter at a restaurant, because of the spontaneity of children who had decided those people were special. Meanwhile, across the city, Jack was having a similar conversation with Camilla. The girl had woken up at 6 a.m., arranged her curly hair with colorful clips, and was wearing her favorite dress, the polka dot one she'd worn to the restaurant, because it was her lucky dress. "Daddy, do you think the boys will still like me?" Camilla asked for the third time, as Jack made coffee. "They already like you, Princess," Jack answered patiently. "You're impossible not to like." "And Eleanor, do you think she likes me?" Jack turned to look at his daughter and saw the genuine insecurity in her eyes. Camilla was only 6, but she had already learned that not everyone looked at her with kindness. Her mother had left. Some kids at school made comments about her clothes not being as nice as theirs, about her lunch being simpler. And now she was about to spend the day with a rich woman and her sons, and she was afraid she wasn't good enough. Jack knelt in front of his daughter, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Camilla, listen to me. Eleanor and the boys like you exactly the way you are. And anyone who doesn't like you for who you are doesn't deserve to be in our lives. Understand?" Camilla nodded, but Jack could still see the doubt. He pulled her into a tight hug. "You're amazing, Princess. Don't let anyone make you forget that." They met at Central Park at 10 a.m., near the main entrance. Eleanor arrived first with the twins and waited by her car, watching the families coming and going. When she saw Jack and Camilla approaching, they had come by bus, she felt her heart quicken in a way she hadn't expected. Jack was wearing jeans and a simple navy blue t-shirt, his hair slightly tousled by the wind. Camilla held his hand tightly, and when she saw the twins, her entire face lit up. Leo and Raphael ran toward her, and within seconds the 3 children were chattering excitedly, as if they hadn't seen each other in months, instead of just a week. Eleanor and Jack stood a few feet apart, just watching. Then their eyes met, and they both smiled. "Hi," Eleanor said, a shyness in her voice that surprised her. "Hi," Jack replied, his hands in his pockets. "You look different, beautiful." Eleanor felt her face warm. "Thank you. You look good too." There was a moment of slightly awkward silence, and then they both laughed at their own strangeness. The children were already running toward the playground, and they followed, walking side by side. "Thanks for coming," Eleanor said. "The boys haven't stopped talking about it all week." "Camila, too," Jack admitted. "She was nervous, afraid you wouldn't like her anymore." Eleanor stopped walking, turning to him in surprise. "Why would she think that—" Jack shrugged, but there was a sadness in his eyes. Life has already taught her that people leave, that sometimes she isn't enough. Eleanor's heart broke a little. She looked over at Camila, who was laughing as Leo helped her climb the slide. She is more than enough. She's special. "I know," Jack said softly. "But it's nice when other people see it too." They spent the whole morning at the park. The kids played on the playground, ran across the great lawn, chased pigeons. Eleanor and Jack sat on a nearby bench, talking and watching. It was surprising how easy it was to talk to him. There was no pretense, no need to impress. They talked about everything and nothing: movies they liked, childhood songs, places they wanted to visit. "Have you ever traveled outside the U.S.?" Jack asked at one point. "Several times," Eleanor replied, and then she saw the look on his face. It wasn't envy, but a recognition of the distance between their realities. "But you know what's funny? I barely remember those trips. They were always for work, always rushed. Meetings, contracts, events. I saw airports and conference rooms. I rarely saw the actual place." "I've never left New York," Jack admitted. "One day I want to take Camila to see the ocean. She's never really seen the ocean." "Never." Eleanor was shocked. Most of the kids she knew went to the beach every summer, some several times a year. "Haven't been able to afford it yet," Jack said simply, without shame. "But I will one day. It's on my list." Eleanor was silent for a moment, processing. The twins had been to the beach dozens of times, traveled abroad, stayed in expensive resorts. But were they happier than Camila, who was eagerly waiting for the day she would see the ocean for the first time? She wasn't sure. "Mom, Dad." The children came running, sweaty and happy. "Can we get ice cream?" Eleanor was about to say yes when she saw Jack hesitate, his hand automatically going to his pocket where he likely kept his cash. She recognized the gesture. He was mentally calculating if he could afford it. And without thinking, she said, "My treat. It's my gift to you all today." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but Eleanor cut him off with a look. "Let me do this, please. It's not charity. It's just a mom wanting to see all the kids happy." Jack looked at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay. Thank you." They went to an ice cream cart, and Eleanor let the kids choose whatever they wanted. The twins got elaborate sundaes, and Camila, clearly impressed with the options, shyly chose a strawberry cone with sprinkles. Jack got a simple popsicle, and Eleanor a lemon sorbet. They sat at a table under a tree, and while the kids devoured their treats, Eleanor and Jack spoke in low voices. "I don't want you to feel bad about accepting this," Eleanor said softly. "I know you have your pride, and I respect that. But sometimes letting someone do something nice for you is also a form of giving. You're giving me the chance to make my sons happy, to see them interact with real kids, not the spoiled children of my colleagues." Jack smiled, but there was emotion in his eyes. "You have a way with words, you know, that comes with the territory of negotiating contracts," Eleanor joked, then turned serious. "But I'm being serious, Jack. Being here with you all, it's good, it's real, and I haven't had that in a very long time." "Me neither," Jack admitted. "Since Camila's mom left, I kind of closed myself off. I worked, took care of her, and that was it. No time or energy for anything else. But with you, I don't know. It's different." Their eyes met, and there was something intense in that gaze. It wasn't just physical attraction, though Eleanor couldn't deny that Jack was attractive in a simple, honest way. It was more than that. It was connection, recognition, the feeling of finding someone who understood the battles you fought, even if they came from a completely different battlefield. "Dad! Mom!" Camila shouted, breaking the moment. "Come see, the boys are teaching me how to skateboard." Eleanor and Jack exchanged an amused look and got up to join the kids. Leo and Raphael, who had brought skateboards, were patiently teaching Camila how to balance. She would fall, get up, laugh, and try again. There was no frustration, no giving up, just pure determination and joy. "She's brave," Eleanor commented, watching. "Yeah," Jack agreed, pride evident in his voice. "She gets that from her dad." Eleanor looked at him, saw the smile on his face as he watched his daughter, and felt something shift inside her chest. Jack was so different from the men she knew. He didn't try to impress, didn't boast about his achievements, didn't measure his self-worth by his bank account or job title. He measured it by the love he gave his daughter, the integrity he maintained even when things were tough, the kindness he offered freely, even when the world hadn't been kind to him. And Eleanor realized with a sudden and startling clarity that she was starting to fall in love with him. The thought hit her with such force that she almost stumbled. Falling in love with a mechanic she barely knew. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was real. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, noticing the expression on her face. "I'm fine," Eleanor replied, but her voice came out a little shaky. "Just thinking. Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and smiled. "Good. Definitely good." Jack smiled back. And in that moment, with the sun filtering through the leaves, the children laughing in the background, and the vibrant city alive around them, something solidified between Eleanor and Jack. It was still fragile, new, scary, but it was real, and they were both willing to find out where it might lead. The day passed too quickly. When the sun began to set, and the children finally showed signs of exhaustion, they prepared to leave. The goodbyes were hard. The three kids hugged each other tightly, promising to see each other again soon. "Can we do this again?" Raphael asked, looking at his mother with hope. "We can," Eleanor confirmed, and then looked at Jack. "If you guys want to." "We want to," Jack replied without hesitation. As they walked back to the parking lot, the kids a few steps ahead, Eleanor felt Jack's hand brush against hers. It was a light, almost accidental touch, but when she looked at him, she saw the intention in his eyes. Slowly, he laced his fingers with hers, and Eleanor didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thanks for today," Jack said quietly. "It was perfect." "For me too," Eleanor replied. And it was true. It had been one of the best days she'd had in years. When they reached the parking lot, Eleanor hesitated. "Jack, can I give you a ride home?" Jack looked at the expensive car, then at Camila, who was clearly exhausted. "Okay, thank you." The ride to Queens was filled with the sleeping children in the back seat and a soft conversation between the adults. When they finally pulled up in front of Jack's apartment building, he hesitated before getting out. "Eleanor, I know this is complicated. Our lives are so different. But I like being with you, and I wanted to know if you'd be willing to try whatever this is." Eleanor's heart raced. She looked at this honest, hard-working, kind man who had entered her life in the most unexpected way, and she knew there was only one answer that made sense. "Yes," she said simply. "I want to try." Jack's smile was so full of happiness and hope that Eleanor felt her eyes sting. He leaned in, hesitated for a second, and then gently kissed her on the cheek. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Jack." And as she drove home with the twins asleep in the back, Eleanor realized her life was changing in ways she had never imagined. And for the first time, instead of being afraid of the change, she was embracing it. The weeks following the day in the park brought a profound shift in Eleanor's life. She started leaving the office earlier, declining meetings that could be handled over email, delegating more responsibility to the team she had hired for that very purpose. And for the first time since Richard died, she didn't feel guilty about it. Because when she came home to Leo and Raphael's genuine smiles, when she heard them talk enthusiastically about their school day because they knew she was truly listening, Eleanor understood she was making the right choice. And Jack was present in all these moments in small but significant ways. Texts during the day asking how she was, calls at night after the kids were asleep. Quick coffee dates when they could fit them into their busy schedules. Nothing extravagant, nothing that drew much attention, but it was real. It was constant, and it was building something solid between them. It was on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after their day at the park, that everything shifted to another level. Eleanor was at home making dinner with the twins, something she never used to do, always leaving it to the cook when her phone rang. It was Jack, and there was something different in his voice. "Eleanor, I'm sorry to call so late, but I need help." Her heart pounded. "What happened? Is everything okay?" "It's Camila. She has a high fever, and I don't know what to do. She's never been this sick before, and I'm—" His voice broke, and Eleanor heard the real fear in it. "Where are you?" Eleanor asked, already grabbing her car keys. "At home. I was going to take her to the hospital, but don't worry, I'm on my way. Stay put." Eleanor hung up quickly, explained to the boys that she had to leave, asked the nanny to stay with them, and ran out. The traffic was horrible, but she drove with a determination that surprised even herself. When she finally reached Jack's building in Queens, she ran up the 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. Jack opened the door before she could even knock, and Eleanor saw the desperation on his face. "Thank you for coming. I didn't know who else to call." Eleanor stepped inside and saw Camila lying on the sofa wrapped in a blanket, her little face flushed with fever. She knelt beside the girl, placing a hand on her forehead. She was burning up. "Hi, Camila," Eleanor said softly. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts," Camila murmured, her eyes glassy. "And I'm cold." Eleanor looked at Jack. "Did you give her any fever reducer?" "An hour ago, but it hasn't come down." "Okay, we're taking her to the hospital. I know an excellent pediatrician who works at Mount Sinai. I'll call her." "Eleanor, I can't afford an expensive private hospital." Jack started, but she cut him off with a firm look. "We are not discussing that right now. Your daughter needs care, and I'm going to make sure she gets the best. We'll figure out the rest later." Jack looked at her, and there was such intense gratitude and relief in his eyes that Eleanor felt her chest ache. He nodded carefully, picked up Camila, and the 3 of them headed to the car. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. The pediatrician Eleanor knew was on call and saw Camila immediately. After some tests and an agonizing hour of waiting, the diagnosis came a throat infection. Nothing serious treatable with antibiotics, but it needed to be monitored. Camila was given medication, her fever started to break, and she finally fell asleep on the gurney, exhausted. Jack sat beside his daughter, holding her small hand, and when he finally let out a sigh of relief, Eleanor saw tears silently streaming down his face. "Hey," she said softly, touching his shoulder. "She's okay. It's going to be okay." Jack wiped his tears with his sleeve, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I was so scared. She's all I have." Eleanor's heart broke and mended all at once. She pulled up a chair and sat next to him, taking his free hand. "You're not alone, Jack. Not anymore. I'm here." He stared at her, and there was something so vulnerable and true in his gaze that Eleanor felt all her remaining barriers crumble. "Why?" Jack asked, his voice hoarse. "Why are you doing all this for us? Why do you care?" Eleanor took a deep breath, knowing it was time to be completely honest. "Because you made me feel alive again. You made me realize I was just surviving, not living. And Camila, the boys. They showed me that family isn't about money or status. It's about being present. It's about love." She squeezed his hand. "And I've fallen in love with you, Jack. I didn't plan it. I didn't expect it, but it happened." The silence that followed was intense. Jack just looked at her, as if trying to process the words, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, a smile so full of happiness and relief that Eleanor felt her own eyes burn. "I've fallen in love with you, too," Jack confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Since that first dinner. Since the moment you sat down at that table and treated my daughter with kindness when you could have just ignored us. You're incredible, Eleanor. And I know our lives are complicated, that we're from different worlds, but—" "I don't care," Eleanor interrupted. "I don't care about different worlds or what people will say. I only care about this." She gestured to Camila, sleeping peacefully, then to the space between them. "I care about you, about her, about building something real. And if you want that too—" "I do," Jack said without hesitation. "More than anything." And there in that hospital room with its cold lighting and smell of disinfectant, surrounded by the beeps of machines and the distant sound of nurses in the hallway, Eleanor and Jack kissed for the first time. It was a soft kiss full of promise and emotion. A kiss that sealed everything they had built over the past few weeks and opened the door to everything that was yet to come. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling, and Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this? Sure you want to step into my messy life with all the complications that come with it?" "Absolutely," Eleanor replied. "And are you sure you want to step into mine with all the corporate craziness, the social pressure, the judgments?" "Absolutely," Jack echoed, smiling. Camila stirred on the gurney, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw Eleanor there, her tired little face lit up. "You stayed," she said with awe. "Of course I stayed," Eleanor replied, stroking the girl's hair. "Did you think I would leave? My mommy left," Camila said simply, without bitterness, just stating a fact. Eleanor felt a painful squeeze in her chest. She looked at Jack, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of permission. Then Eleanor moved closer to Camila and said, "I'm not your mom, Camila, and I will never try to be. But I promise you one thing, I am not leaving. I will be here whenever you need me. Can you believe that?" Camila studied Eleanor's face for a long moment, her wise beyond her years' eyes assessing the sincerity of the words. And then she nodded and held out her small arms for a hug. Eleanor hugged her carefully, feeling the tears finally fall, and heard Camila whisper, "Thank you." 2 weeks later, on a sunny Sunday, Eleanor did something she never imagined she would do. She hosted a barbecue at her mansion on the Upper East Side, but it wasn't one of the flawless corporate events she used to organize. It was a simple party with Jack's friends from the auto shop, Camila's classmates, a few employees from Eleanor's company, who had become real friends, and of course the 3 children, who were the center of it all. Leo, Raphael, and Camila ran through the garden, playing with the water hose, laughing so hard, Eleanor was sure the neighbors must be annoyed, but she didn't care. Jack was beside her grilling burgers with Joe from the shop, the two of them arguing about the perfect way to cook a steak while sipping beer. "Are you happy?" Jack asked quietly when Eleanor came over to grab more skewers. Eleanor looked around. She saw her sons happy and free in a way they hadn't been before. She saw people from completely different worlds mingling naturally without pretense, just enjoying the moment. And then she looked at Jack, at the man who had walked into her life so unexpectedly and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. "I am," she replied, and it was the purest truth she had spoken in years. "Happier than I can remember being." Jack smiled, put down the spatula, and pulled Eleanor close, kissing the top of her head. "Gross!" Raphael shouted from across the yard, making Leo laugh. "I think it's cute," Camila declared, and then ran to hug both their legs. "Are you guys getting married?" Eleanor and Jack exchanged a surprised look and then laughed. "One step at a time, Camila," Jack said, but he was grinning. "But are you going to stay together forever?" Camila insisted. Eleanor knelt to the girl's level. "We're going to do our best. And you know why. Why? Because when you find people who make you want to be better, who make you feel at home, you don't let them go." Eleanor looked at Jack, then at the twins who had gathered around to listen. "And you three gave us that. You brought us together that night at the restaurant and changed everything." "So it was thanks to us?" Raphael exclaimed proudly. "It was," Jack agreed, ruffling the boy's hair. "You three are the most effective cupids I've ever seen." The children laughed and ran back to their games, and Eleanor watched them, her heart full. She thought of Richard, and for the first time the thought wasn't accompanied by guilt or pain, just gratitude for the time they had, and acceptance that life goes on. And she was sure deep in her soul that Richard would approve, that he would be happy to know his sons were happy, that she was living again. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "That life is strange," Eleanor replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You think it's going to be one way, and then a single dad having dinner with his daughter shows up at a restaurant and everything changes." "For better or for worse?" Jack asked, but he was smiling because he already knew the answer. "Infinitely better," Eleanor said, turning to kiss him. "Infinitely." And in that moment, with the sun shining, the children laughing, friends chatting, and the man she loved by her side, Eleanor Vance realized she had finally found what she had been unknowingly searching for. It wasn't professional success, money, or status. It was this. It was love. It was family. It was genuine happiness, built on an honest and real foundation. And as Jack pulled her closer, whispering promises of future dinners, of more Sundays like this, of building a life together, a life that honored where they each came from, but looked toward where they were going together, Eleanor closed her eyes and smiled. Because sometimes life's greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes all you need are two insistent children, a shared table, and the courage to let your heart open to possibilities that logic would call impossible. And sometimes, just sometimes, happy endings are